Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I just got a short little video. I've been playing a lot of arcade remakes on the Atari, and I thought I'd pull out one of my old plug-and-plays, and this is the Space Invaders Arcade Legends by Taito, or Taito, however you prefer to pronounce it. This is a plug-and-play released sometime in the 2000s. I'd have to look it up. I'll throw it up on the screen. Probably 2005, 6, 7, somewhere around there. And it had a handful of classics on here, and it was, I think I got it for a discount because I don't think I would have bought it otherwise. I'm pretty sure I spent only like $10 on this one. It might have been marked down to half price or something because it didn't look very exciting to me. But I picked it up and I played it a little bit and kind of tucked it away and have forgotten about it for a long time. But I was going through all my plug and plays and I was like, well, let's give this a shot again. So I pulled it out, and of course I started off right with the first one, Space Invaders, and it's pretty decent clone of the original arcade Space Invaders. Now these clearly aren't the arcade ROMs, but the sounds and the gameplay is pretty good. The complaint I'll have over and over throughout this whole playthrough is pretty much the fire buttons on this thing, because they're kind of, I don't know what to say. They're not clicky. You can hear how nice and clicky the joystick is. It's very responsive. It feels good. But the fire buttons are a little soft or something. There's no great feedback on the buttons. They're not clicky. They kind of just push down. So I find it hard, and it's also, they're not easy to push repetitively. And here's, you can see what the controller looks like here. So that's how it's set up. There's a game in here that uses 2 buttons, kicks. So they had to put 2 on there. But again, pushing that button gets a little flaky. And of course, the joystick's nice and the base is a little bigger, but that doesn't mean you still don't have to hold it with one hand. I found myself holding this kind of like a regular Atari joystick, using my thumb for the fire buttons on one side and using the joystick with my left or right hand, depending on how it felt on each game. And having to use your thumb, it really wears out your hand. So if this could lock down somehow, it probably would improve it. Or if there was a way to go inside and change that little button for really cheap to one that's nice and responsive like a real arcade one, that would make a big difference. So that's the only downside to this. So let's move on to game number 2, and that is Lunar Rescue. So Lunar Rescue, I probably played this in the arcade way back. I mean, this is the early days of arcades when, they were trying to just make as many kind of Space Invader clones and just capitalize on their early success of Space Invaders. So this one, the goal is you drop your lander out, you've got to navigate the field of asteroids or whatnot, maybe comets, whatever you want to call these. And then once you pick up your man, you have to land on each one of these spots to get through each round and save all the men. And you pick up a man, then you got to fly back up to your mothership, and you've got to navigate through spaceships shooting at you and such, with comets streaking around occasionally. So kind of a mix of maybe Lunar Lander with, I don't know, asteroids, Space Invaders, a little of everything. They just were trying to make games. This is, if you remember the early games, everything was just space this, space that, because that was the exciting theme after Space Invaders came out. So you had some sports ones too, and maybe some driving, but the space stuff just took off like crazy. But that's that. It's not a bad game. I have fun playing it. It's a little challenging. I don't even get through the first round in this gameplay, but it gets trickier and trickier. So not too bad. It's a lot more exciting than Space Invaders to me. So that's what matters the most. All right, now what do we got next here? Let's move on to, and this one actually surprised me, Colony 7. I don't believe I ever saw this in any arcades, and it's kind of a missile command game. And I say that, but it doesn't have a trackball, so it does use a joystick in the arcade version from what I saw. So playing it on this is a little more natural than you would think. And I think it handles pretty well. Again, the tough part is just using that joystick because it's not locked down. It makes a big difference when you have to hold it with one hand. These arcade games that they made, I almost wish there was I don't know how to say it, maybe just a solid, clear hole through the top of these, if you get my drift, to a point where you put a screw in, and it just goes down into the base of it straight through, and you would latch it from the bottom with a wing nut or something to something more stable, like if you had a solid piece of wood that you could build. Just to make the base stable. And if all these plug-and plays had that one design where it had that kind of hole down the close to the center maybe, and it just had a little base metal plate in the bottom, a small one that it could put the screw right through. I don't know if I'm describing this right, but I think some people get what I'm saying. And then you could just use a wing nut to tighten it through into a big, large panel or something. So you had a real good, stable base, and you weren't having to hold it. You could just use it like a joystick. That would have been fantastic, because that's what ruins these games. Now here we have Kicks, and I really enjoy Kicks. I have fun with this a lot. But again, this is the same situation where it's a super fun game on here. It plays, these games play really well, and it's just hindered by the fact that you have this joystick that you have to hold. So, I mean, it's hard to rate this on gameplay because I know it plays well. And this one even more so. The buttons aren't as big a deal because you're pushing one or the other to do a slow draw, that's the red fills, or a fast draw, which are the blue fills. And of course, when you do a slow draw, you get more points, as you saw in the instructions there. So Kicks is really a fun game. I enjoy it a lot. And again, just the downside is that it doesn't have the ability to just lock in. So I don't know what to do about this. I don't know if there's a way to look inside of this and just drill a hole through myself or something, but it would really make it a lot more fun. And that's the big key. So not the biggest collection of games here. I think we only have 5 games here, so it's not a huge collection. But when I was considering buying this, that's one of the things where I'm like, well, it's only a couple bucks for each game, so there's nothing wrong with that. So let's move on to the final one here is Phoenix. Probably their second biggest game. I don't know. It's tough to say. Was Phoenix bigger than Kicks? Probably a little bit. I mean, Space Invaders, obviously the #1 game in this collection. So Phoenix would either be 2 or 3, depending on who you are and what you preferred. But this one actually is pretty great. I felt like after I just played the version on the Atari recently, 2600, this does a pretty good job capturing the arcade. It's the one thing I had trouble with is it seemed on this emulator, whatever they're using to emulate it, the sound would get a little wonky, so I've had to do a reset because it just sounded like the audio was kind of flaking out. You kind of would hear that in the first gameplay I did of Space Invaders. I don't know if it'll come through to you, but when I was playing Space Invaders, suddenly the audio changed a bit and it sounded a little wonky, so I just turned it off and on again, and it sounded fine. But Phoenix is probably the most fun game, the most action-packed game on here. It's very intense, and I'll tell you what, I played it a handful of times, and I could not get the boss on this. I came so close, but this is one of those games where that's the whole point, you know? It's really about having the skills to get through that boss level. The rest of it you kind of get good at, and I mean, it gets more difficult. They get more aggressive as time goes on, but it looks great on the TV. I mean, I'm recording this right off of the big screen CRT, the 35-inch Toshiba. Probably not the best screen to record on, but I was surprised how stable it looked. Instead of putting out a 480i, this is probably putting out a 240p because it is very stable. It is not shaky. I mean, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, some TVs don't handle that 480i as well. It's very jittery, and some TVs do, like the Sony Trinitron I have. They handle 480i pretty well, and they look stable. But on this Mitsubishi, when it's 480i, it's very jittery. But you can see on this is not too jittery. Everything's pretty stable. Like, you see the pixels there? Those are very stable. You see the dots, and you see the black in between them. If this was 480i, it would probably be shimmering a ton. And I'm not getting any of that. So I was really impressed with the fact that they chose probably to use 240p for this little emulator, because it's an old arcade game. You didn't really need high resolution. So what do I think overall of this whole collection? Well, it's pretty good. But I wouldn't spend 20 bucks on it. And I think that's what the going rate is online usually. You're going to spend about $20 to $30 on this. I mean, if you're getting it loose and you got to pay for shipping. And if you want it in the box, you're probably paying like 50 bucks or something crazy like that. But if you saw this at a Goodwill or something for $2.99, something like that, these are perfect games to pick up because, you know, you're not going to play these often, but it's just when you're totally bored silly, once in a while, pulling out a game like this and playing it is perfectly fine. Just to change it up a bit. You know, again, if you can find it for a couple bucks out in the wild, you find it at a Goodwill or some yard sale, it's definitely worth picking up and having a little fun. So there we go. We'll see you next time. So long.